Want to create the easiest and sweetest DIY birthday shaker card? In today's video, I'm showing you how to make a show-stopping 3D card featuring a cake dripping with ganache and topped with macaron, meringues, and frosting. And we are adding a fun interactive twist, a sparkly shaker window that will bring the ultimate wow factor. I'll also share 3 more interesting ideas on how you can stretch your supplies and create completely different looks with this concept. Let's get started. I have this really cute die set I'm using today for a birthday card that features a cake heaped with macaron, meringues, and icing. I have a panel measuring 5.5 by 7.5 for a 5 by 7 card, and I have an embossing folder and coordinating stencil that I'll use for the background. These products were very kindly gifted to me by Spellbinders, including the sentiment dies. I'll be making a shaker, so I'll start with cutting out the window in the center and embossing the background panel. I always use a little bit of washi tape towards the inside to hold down the die. That way, there's no chance for the washi tape to rip the card front. I'll spritz the card panel with a little bit of water because that prevents the paper from cracking by softening the fibers and also brings out the details, especially in a 3D embossing folder. I'm using Platform A embossing folder with the card panel and adapter plate E to complete the embossing. The reason I cut out the window first is because a second run through the die cutting machine after the panel is embossed would have flattened out the embossing. So it's always a good idea to cut before you emboss. I'll now complete all the die cutting and walk you through all of that in just a bit. So let's continue. I have a couple of pieces of cardstock cut out from the center, and I'll stack them together to die cut some of the smaller pieces. Since these are all solid dies, I'll angle them a little bit on the plate so my die cutting machine offers less resistance while the dies are going through. I'll use another one of my smaller craft stacks boxes to store these die cuts so I don't lose them, especially the smaller pieces. I cut out some extra pieces of the frosting as well because I want to stack them together for dimension. By the way, if you're looking for the list of supplies, you'll find affiliate links in my blog post that is linked in the description. You'll find thumbnails of the detailed list of all the supplies I'm using today on my cards. It would help me out a lot if you use the links in case you decide to purchase any of these supplies. While they won't cost you anything extra, it will definitely help out my channel. So thank you very much if you decide to support me. I've completed the die cutting and created a large stash of them to use on the card. Of course, I'll have some leftovers, but I'd rather cut out a few extra than have to whip out the die cutting machine again. I'll use this Better Press sentiment from my stash. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a video on how I use my Better Press system, and I'll put it on my video planner. I had scrap cardstock from Spellbinders in cream, pale pink, and brown, which I used to create some vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate macaron and frosting. I've used this die to create what I think are meringues. Please correct me in the comments because I think you can tell that I'm not a baker. And this one is for the smaller swirly pieces of icing that I'll be layering on top of the long strip. This strip cuts out 5 at a time, and I'll use them for layering as well. The good thing about these pieces is that you can actually break them apart. Once you tear them apart, you can layer them up like this with the matching pieces. And once you find the correct piece, you can layer up pretty easily. I've created a large batch of macaron pieces, and I'll show you how to assemble them in just a second. I also used a punch to punch out some bits from these leftover scraps because I can use them as confetti for my shaker card. I'm going to mix up the paper confetti with some sparkly gem shaker bits and use a few on the background as well to create a bit of texture. I cut out these silver strips, but I ultimately won't use them since the cake is already tall enough. I'll be adding icing and macaron on top of the cake, so there won't be any more room to add the topper on this card. I'll add some ink using a very light hand to add a little bit of shading on the icing for some contrast. I'll use my Altenew sticky mat to hold the pieces down since they're tiny, and this is the most convenient way to ink blend. I'm using a dome foam blender, and for the cream, I'm using buttercream by Altenew. For the chocolate, I'm using mocha by Salmon Says Stem, and off camera, I added spun sugar distress oxide to the strawberry pieces. I'm going to complete the card panel now with the coordinating stencil. Since this is a non-directional stencil, it's a little tricky to figure out which is the right way up. So while I'm at it, I'll use a Sharpie to add an indicator to mark the correct orientation so I don't waste time trying to figure it out the next time I use it. I learned this wonderful hack from Jennifer McGuire, and I have a full video on 19 more hacks, which I'll link to at the end of this video. I'm going to use these two Solar Pastes by Sam & Hurley. The colors are Golden Hour and Cross My Heart. Because this is white cardstock, the paste will just add a sheen when you tilt it in the light, but it's not going to add much color to it. You could ink blend if you like, but I wanted to keep the background fairly neutral with only a hint of a shine. If you're using paste, make sure you clean your tools and work surfaces immediately. I like to use baby wipes right away or take them to the sink and wash them off. I'm using another foam blender to apply the paste. You can also use your fingers to do that if you like. I'll apply both colors on some of the diamonds, but not all of them. I'm applying the paste first on the foam and then making sure to break down any globs by swirling it around on the lid. This will ensure I have a smooth and light film of paste on the surface. I'm not sure if you can see the really subtle shine on camera, but it's there, and it's really just a hint of shine as I tilt it towards the light, and it looks really pretty. Since I'm making a shaker card, I'll use this piece of acetate to create the window. The acetate looks cloudy since there are 2 layers of protective film on either side of it. I'm not that great with measurements, so I often physically measure the card panel and use a pencil to mark where I need to cut. Now, I'll trim the acetate down so I can use the leftover on something else. I get my acetate from Sam & Says Stamp since they're high quality and can withstand heat, although I won't be applying any heat today. It's time to remove the protective film from the front and glue it down. I'll use a generous amount of glue to adhere the acetate behind the card panel, and I'll put an acrylic block on top and leave it to dry while I do a little bit of ink blending on the background and adhere a few of the paper confetti I punched out at the start. I'll use spun sugar distress oxide in the center and a little worn lipstick to create a little bit of shading around the edges where I'll be adding the layered frosting and macaron. I'll bring back my Altenew sticky mat for this again. I'm really not worried about having uniform coverage with the inks because it's mostly going to get covered up by shaker bits behind the acetate, but I'll make sure the color is visible. Since spun sugar is a really light color, I may need to add a little bit more. Now that this is perfect, there are a couple more things I need to do to complete the background. I need confetti in all 3 colors, but a few more of the brown since that'll create more contrast, and also since the shaker bits will sit at the bottom of the window, I just want to have a few visible on top across the background. It's just a little bit of detail to elevate the design to the next level. This looks sufficient, so I'll stick these down before we continue with the rest. The background is ready, so all I'm going to do now is cut the embossed panel and background down to exactly 5 by 7 inches. I'm going to go ahead and prepare the shaker by adding foam strips to elevate the embossed panel from the background and create the pocket for the shaker bits. I want to ensure I have enough room for the shaker bits to move around in here. I'm using my Spellbinders nonstick shears to cut out the foam strip. I need to make sure there are no gaps between the foam strips so the smaller sequins and bits don't fall out through them. Since the top edge of the window is slightly curved, I'll remove the backing paper on the foam strip so it's easy to manipulate along the curve. Before I put this down, I want to make sure that the sequins won't stick along the edges, so I'll apply some anti-static powder that we normally use for embossing and just pat it down around the edge. I'll try to find the sticky parts and apply some more powder to those areas, and I'll finally wipe the excess off with a dry Swiffer cloth and a brush. Here I have some sequins I got from AliExpress, and they'll be perfect as shaker bits. Since this is a large shaker, I'll need quite a large amount of these sequins, and I'll throw in some of the paper confetti as well. Now I'll adhere the shaker front onto the background and use the corners of the scoring board to make sure everything lines up all together. I'll add some glue over the foam tape so I can slide the panel into position. Now it's time to assemble the cake elements on the front, and also do stick around until the end when I'll share 3 more exciting design inspiration using the same die set. I'm going to layer up most of the individual elements for dimension since the card front has 3D embossing on it. If I were to use single layers, there would be a bit of mismatch in the textures of the different elements on the card front. I'm using Barely Art liquid glue for adhering all the elements since I'm adhering them to a bumpy surface. There is a die for creating the ganache strip that I'm not using on this card since it would cover up the shaker window. So with the exception of that and the banners and bunting, I have the rest of the pieces cut out. Let me show you how to assemble the macaron. This is the base and it has etchings on it to indicate where the layers will go. I'm using the chocolate pieces with the hope that you can see the etchings on camera, but I'll mix and match the colors when assembling them. It's really convenient to use a jewel picker to do the assembly since these are such tiny pieces. It's pretty easy to identify the right pieces since the shape is already etched onto the base layer. All you have to do is match the straight edged layers to the part with a straight edge and the wavy layer to the wavy etching. This one is complete and look at how cute this is and so realistic. I have some more ideas for the macarons for future cards. I'll assemble one more in front of you and then go off camera and assemble the rest. Now it's time to add all the remaining pieces to the ganache gâteau. I'll pile the top with meringue and macaron and add some to the base. I'll now use a piece of press and seal to pick up all the pieces at once without disturbing the arrangement. I'll apply a generous amount of glue behind all the pieces and then put them back on top of the cake. I'll do the same with the macaron at the base of the cake. I'll adhere the sentiment in the center of the shaker window and support the macaron with small pieces of foam tape behind them. Finally, I'll adhere the shaker panel to the card base and trim down the narrow overhang with the spellbinder scissors. This die set has a lot of possibilities, and I can already think of at least 3 more card ideas with this set. An obvious one would be to create a complete cake with all the bells and whistles. I would in fact trim off the bottom of the cake to create a slightly shorter one and then add the banner that I didn't use on top of the cake. The second idea is that I can add a plaid background to make this into a masculine card. You can check out my video for plaid backgrounds that I've linked in the description. I can also make this into a cake-shaped card, and that is the third idea. And what I'll do is add all the macaron and the icing on front as well as the back of the cake to give this a 3D feel. If you're interested in learning some game-changing crafty hacks from the all-time greats like Jennifer Maguire, Gina Kay, Kathy Zilski, and BB Cameron, I've put together a video of 20 of their easiest hacks that will change your card making game forever. Make sure you check out this video here.